Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It happened on a Thursday morning. I remember because the sky was unusually grey, that kind of color that makes you question if the day even began. My son and I were on the train to visit my sister outside the city. It wasn't a long trip, but something about that morning felt heavier than usual. The air inside the carriage smelled of wet coats and coffee, and every sound, the metal screech, the quiet chatter, the rhythmic rumble, seemed to echo louder than it should. He was sitting across from me, my son, facing the window. I noticed his reflection before I noticed his silence. Usually, he'd talk about work, politics, or the latest podcast he'd found, but that morning he was completely still. His hands were clasped together, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the glass. I asked him if everything was all right. He smiled, that polite kind of smile that hides more than it says, and told me he was fine. But a mother knows something was bothering him. I could see it in the way his jaw tensed, how he rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring, slow and deliberate. It reminded me of how he used to fidget as a boy before confessing he'd broken something. But this was different. This wasn't guilt. It was worry. The train lurched slightly, and he caught the handrail. I noticed his hand trembling, not much, but enough to make my heart skip. I reached out and placed my hand over his. He didn't pull away, but he didn't look at me either. I could feel the warmth in his palm, and yet, there was a distance, an invisible wall between us that I hadn't felt in years. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "Mom," he said, almost whispering, "do you ever feel like you're losing parts of yourself, piece by piece, and no one notices?" That question sat between us like a third passenger. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, and my mind raced through every possible meaning. Was he talking about his marriage? His job? His health? Or maybe something deeper, something I hadn't allowed myself to see. I told him that yes, sometimes life feels like that. Like little fragments of who you are slip away quietly while you're too busy surviving to notice. He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the window, where rain had begun tracing crooked lines down the glass. I wanted to ask more, but he looked so fragile in that moment, like if I pushed, he'd shatter. So I let the silence sit between us, hoping he'd continue when he was ready. Across the aisle, a little girl was laughing at something on her mother's phone. The sound was pure, unfiltered joy, and somehow, it made everything feel heavier. My son turned toward the laughter too, his lips parting slightly, as if remembering something distant. Then he said, "Do you ever wish you could go back, Mom? To when everything was simpler?" I smiled, though it wasn't an easy one. "All the time," I said. The train entered a tunnel then, and for a few seconds, everything went dark. The hum grew louder, and the windows turned into mirrors. That's when I saw it clearly, his face, pale and drawn, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Regret? Maybe both. When we emerged from the tunnel, he reached into his pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. He stared at it for a while before slipping it back in without saying a word. My chest tightened again. I didn't ask, though every part of me wanted to. Instead, I reached into my bag and handed him a small pack of almonds, something I always carried since he was little. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You still do that," he said. "Always ready to feed me." "Some habits never die," I replied. For a brief moment, the tension broke. He took a few, thanked me, and the corners of his mouth lifted, the first real smile I'd seen all morning. But beneath it, I could still sense something brewing, something waiting to surface. As the train slowed near the next station, he stood up suddenly and said he needed some air. I told him we'd be arriving soon, but he shook his head. "I'll just be a minute." He stepped out onto the platform when the doors opened. I watched him through the window as he stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the tracks like he was searching for something only he could see. Then the signal sounded. The doors began to close, and for one terrifying second, I thought he wasn't coming back. I stood up, panic rising in my throat, ready to call his name, but just as the doors began to shut, he slipped inside again, breathless, as if he'd run a mile. He sat back down, avoiding my eyes. His hands were empty now. Whatever he had taken with him, the folded paper, perhaps, was gone. "Are you okay?" I asked again, Softly. He nodded. Yeah, Mom. I just needed to let something go. The way he said it, steady, almost peaceful, sent a shiver through me. The train moved again, carrying us forward, but my thoughts stayed back there on that platform. I didn't know what he had let go of. A letter. A burden. A secret. All I knew was that something in him had shifted. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled deeply. And for the rest of that ride, I watched the man he'd become, so strong, yet so fragile, and wondered how many times I'd missed the quiet battles behind his silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds began to thin, and sunlight spilled through the windows, washing his face in gold. I turned away, blinking back the tears I hadn't realized were there, because sometimes, when your child is hurting, the hardest thing to do is nothing. And as the train sped toward our destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was more than a trip. It was the beginning of something neither of us fully understood yet. The day after that train ride, something in the air between us felt different, quieter, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, when the world hasn't quite returned to normal, but you can finally breathe again. My son stayed the night at my sister's house with me, but I could tell he barely slept. I could hear him moving in the next room, pacing softly, opening and closing drawers. In the morning, he joined me in the kitchen. I was already making coffee, and the smell filled the small house. He looked tired, but there was a calmness in his expression I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. He poured himself a cup, then sat down across from me. The same seat he used to take as a teenager when he was too proud to admit he needed advice. Mom, he began, voice low, eyes fixed on the table. There's something I should probably tell you. I didn't move. I just waited. Sometimes silence is the only way to make someone feel safe enough to talk. He took a deep breath. Yesterday, on the train, that piece of paper I had, it was my resignation letter. For a moment, I didn't process it. I blinked at him, coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. You quit your job? He nodded slowly. I dropped it on the platform before I got back on the train. The memory of that moment flashed through my mind, him stepping off, the folded paper, the strange peace in his voice when he said he needed to let something go. It all made sense now. Why? I asked softly. He leaned back, exhaling hard. Because I realized I've been living someone else's life, Mom. I wake up every day, dress the way they expect me to, talk the way they want me to. And I just stopped recognizing myself. There was no bitterness in his voice, only exhaustion. And a kind of raw honesty that made my heart ache. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. You've worked there for years, I said. That's a big part of your life to walk away from. I know, he said quietly. But lately, it's felt like I've been disappearing in slow motion. Like every day, a piece of me fades. And I didn't even notice until I sat on that train with you yesterday. His eyes lifted to meet mine. You were just sitting there calm, watching the rain, asking about breakfast, and I realized how long it's been since I felt that kind of peace. I missed it. I missed me. That confession did something to me. I saw not the man he'd become, but the boy I used to hold when he was scared of thunder. The boy who would climb into my bed and whisper, "Stay here, Mom." And now, decades later, I was still his safe place, though neither of us said it aloud. I smiled softly. Then maybe letting go wasn't the end of something, I said. Maybe it was the beginning. He didn't answer right away. He just stared out the window, where the light from the morning sun was breaking through the fog. Birds darted across the trees, their wings flashing silver in the light. After a while, he said, I don't know what comes next. I don't have a plan. That's all right, I told him. Sometimes the best parts of life begin when you stop trying to plan them. He chuckled quietly, shaking his head. You always make it sound so simple. Because it is simple, I said. It's just not easy. He smiled then, a genuine one, the kind that starts slow and reaches the eyes. It warmed the room more than the sunlight. The rest of the morning passed in comfortable silence. We cooked eggs and toast, like we used to when he was little, and I really watched him, for the first time in years. There were lines around his eyes now, a few strands of grey in his hair, but there was also something familiar beneath it all. The same spark he had as a boy, just buried under the weight of adulthood. Later that day, we went for a walk near the river. The air was crisp, and the path was quiet except for the sound of gravel under our shoes. He talked about everything, not just work, but his marriage, his fears, the feeling of being stuck in a life that looked perfect but didn't feel right. I listened, not as a mother giving advice, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose yourself and try to find the way back. At one point, he asked me, "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently, Mom?" I hesitated. "All the time," I admitted. "But every choice, even the wrong ones, led me here, to this moment, with you. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." He stopped walking then, turned toward me, and said quietly, "You always make things make sense." I smiled, though my chest felt tight. That's what mothers do. As we stood there by the river, the wind rippling through the water, I realized something. This wasn't just his turning point. It was mine too. For years, I'd carried the quiet fear that my son had grown into someone distant, unreachable. But here he was, opening his heart, letting me see the man behind the armor. When we got back home, he said he wanted to take a drive the next morning alone, just to clear his head. I agreed, though a small part of me worried. But I didn't stop him. Because sometimes, love means letting them find their own road. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about that train ride again, about the gray sky, the folded paper, the silence between us. I realized it wasn't just him who'd been holding on to something. I had too. Expectations. Control. The fear of being left behind, and maybe, just like him, it was time for me to let something go too. He left early the next morning, just as the sun was beginning to rise. I heard the quiet rumble of his car outside and peeked through the curtain to see him standing by the driver's door, sipping his coffee, staring at the horizon. The sky was a soft orange, the kind that promises warmth after a cold night. For a brief moment, I thought he looked peaceful. I didn't stop him. I just whispered a small prayer under my breath that wherever he went, he'd find what he was looking for. Hours passed. My sister went to work, the house fell silent, and I found myself wandering through the kitchen, touching things absent-mindedly: the chair he sat in, the half-empty coffee cup he'd left on the counter, the folded napkin beside it. Every trace of him felt like a whisper, a reminder of the man who had once been my little boy. Around noon, he called. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice clear but distant. I could hear wind in the background. "I'm fine. Don't worry." I wasn't. I lied. He laughed softly. "Yes, you were." He told me he'd driven to the coast, a place we used to visit when he was a teenager. There was an old pier there, long and creaky, stretching out into the grey-blue water. "It looks the same," he said. "Even the same little diner still stands at the end of the road." I pictured it instantly: the chipped white paint, the faded sign that read Harbor Diner, the smell of fried fish and salt. It was a place filled with ghosts of simpler days. "Do you remember when we used to go there?" I asked. "I do," he said quietly. "You'd always order tea, and I'd steal your fries." We both laughed at that. Then there was a pause. A gentle, heavy pause. "Mom," he said after a moment, "I think I just needed to remember who I was before everything got complicated." I felt tears sting my eyes, though I didn't let him hear it in my voice. "Sometimes the past isn't meant to trap us," I said. "It's there to remind us how to begin again." He didn't answer, but I heard him breathe deeply, like he was taking that thought with him. That evening, he came back just as the sky turned a deep violet. His shoulders looked lighter somehow. He didn't say much, just smiled, hugged me a little longer than usual, and sat down beside me on the porch. We watched the last bit of daylight fade behind the hills. "I talked to Emma today," he finally said, referring to his wife. "Oh?" I asked, careful not to sound too curious. He nodded. "It wasn't easy. But I told her the truth. About how I've been feeling. About needing space to figure things out." My stomach tightened. "How did she take it?" He looked out toward the trees before answering. "Better than I expected. I think she already knew." We sat in silence for a while. The night sounds grew louder: the hum of insects, the distant barking of a dog, the faint whistle of wind through the trees. There was something healing in that silence. He told me how he'd stood on the edge of the pier that afternoon, watching the waves crash against the wooden posts. "I felt small, but not in a bad way," he said. "Like the ocean didn't care who I was, and somehow, that was comforting." I understood. Life has a way of humbling you, reminding you that all the noise we create, the struggles we carry, are only tiny ripples in a vast sea. I think I forgot what it means to just be still," he added. "To stop chasing something and just exist for a while." "You found that stillness today," I said. "Hold on to it." He smiled faintly. "I will." As the stars began to appear, he leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in years, he looked content, not fixed, not certain, but present. That was enough. Later, when I was washing the dishes, I caught him in the reflection of the kitchen window. He was standing in the yard, hands in his pockets, staring up at the night sky. There was something almost childlike about the way he looked, as if he were rediscovering wonder. It reminded me of when he was little, how he'd lie on the grass beside me and ask questions about the stars. Back then, I always had answers. Now, I wasn't sure I did anymore. But maybe he didn't need answers this time. Maybe he just needed the quiet. Before bed, he came to my door and said goodnight. His voice was steady, his eyes clear. "Thanks for everything, Mom." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "Just promise me you'll keep talking to me, to her, to yourself." He nodded. "I will." When I turned out the light, I lay awake thinking about how strange and beautiful life is, how we spend decades teaching our children to stand on their own, and then one day, they teach us how to let go. That night, I dreamt of the ocean, of that pier stretching into forever, the waves carrying away everything that no longer needed to stay. And when I woke in the early hours, I found a note on the kitchen table, written in his handwriting, "Gone for a walk. Don't worry. I just want to see the sunrise." I smiled, though tears blurred the words. Because I knew he wasn't running away anymore. He was walking toward something new. The next morning, the house was quiet when I woke. Sunlight streamed softly through the blinds, painting the walls gold, but he wasn't there. I glanced at the clock early, but not too early, and smiled, already knowing where he might be. The note from last night had said sunrise, and I trusted that. I brewed a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. The world felt alive in a way that only early mornings can feel, the crispness in the air, the faint scent of dew on the grass, and the low hum of birds greeting the day. I didn't have to look long. There he was, just past the old oak tree, walking slowly toward the meadow. His hands were in his pockets, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the wind. I stayed on the porch, watching him for a while. There was something in the way he moved that made my chest ache, not with sadness, but with pride and relief. He was present, grounded, yet carrying the weight of reflection in his eyes. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing the real him, not the careful mask he wore for the world. When he finally noticed me, he waved lightly, and I returned it with a smile. He didn't rush back, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he sat at the edge of the meadow, letting the grass brush against his fingers, letting the sunrise fill his face. I watched silently, realizing that some lessons can't be taught with words. They're learned through patience, observation, and the quiet act of simply being. After a long while, he stood, brushing the grass from his pants, and started walking back toward the house. "It's beautiful," he said softly as he approached. "I've been so caught up in everything else that I forgot this exists." I nodded, not needing to comment further. Sometimes acknowledgement is enough. Over breakfast, we didn't speak much. Coffee steamed in our cups, toast crunched lightly under our teeth, and the small sounds of a house coming to life filled the space between us. And yet, it wasn't silent in a lonely way. It was the kind of silence that holds meaning, that allows hearts to breathe. Later, as we tidied the kitchen together, he finally spoke about the next steps he wanted to take. "I've been thinking about what I really want," he said. "Not what everyone else expects, not what feels safe, but what I actually want." "And have you figured it out?" I asked, gently. "Not entirely," he admitted. "But I'm closer than I've ever been. And I don't feel lost anymore." The words settled over me like a warm blanket. I thought about the train ride, the folded paper, the hours of reflection at the pier, and the morning walk. Each step had brought him closer to understanding himself, and in turn, closer to me. That afternoon, we went for a drive along the coast. The sunlight danced on the water, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing across the cliffs. He spoke about ideas he had for his career, small changes he wanted to make in his daily life, and how he planned to reconnect with friends he'd drifted away from. I listened, offering thoughts when asked, but mostly just enjoying the presence of my son, the man he had become and the boy he still carried within him. We stopped at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, the kind with worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs. We ordered 2 coffees and sat by the window, watching fishing boats bob gently in the tide. He reached across the table, resting his hand lightly on mine. "Thanks for letting me go," he said. I squeezed his hand. "You didn't need permission," I said. "But I'm glad you did." There was a moment of quiet connection, the kind that exists without words. I realized then that parenting isn't about control or guidance. It's about love, steady, patient, unwavering love, and the courage to let go when the time comes. The drive home was slow, reflective. We didn't rush, didn't fill the car with conversation. Instead, we let the rhythm of the road and the sound of the ocean in the distance guide us. Every mile felt like a step away from the tension that had haunted us, toward something lighter, freer, and more authentic. That evening, as we prepared dinner together, he paused and said, "Mom, I think I understand something important now." "What's that?" I asked. "That happiness isn't a destination," he said, chopping vegetables with care. "It's a series of moments, quiet, sometimes small, sometimes hard-earned. And I've been learning to notice them again." I smiled, heart full. "And the journey continues," I added. He nodded, eyes soft. "Yes. But it feels manageable now." Later, after he had gone to bed, I stepped onto the porch one last time that day. The stars had come out, and the night air was cool but comforting. I thought about the past few days, the train, the folded paper, the sunrise, the pier, the walks, the conversations, and realized something profound. Life doesn't always give us clear paths, but it gives us moments like these to remember who we are and who we want to be. And in the quiet of the night, watching the world settle under the stars, I felt a deep gratitude. For my son, for the trust we shared, for the courage it took both of us to face ourselves. And for the simple truth that sometimes, letting go isn't an ending. It's the beginning of everything we were meant to find. The sun would rise again tomorrow, and we would face it together, not as 2 people burdened by unspoken fears, but as mother and son, connected by love, understanding, and the quiet power of presence. The journey wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope was fully ours to claim.